Welcome to Midnight Selections, your home for the best in modern horror and extreme cinema. In this video, we're going to talk horror like it's 1999. Why 99? Is this the year when modern horror starts? Hell no. But it is a pivotal year where a lot of the trends start to take shape that push horror films into the next millennium. So let's jump into the Midnight Selections Top 10 Horrors of 1999. Since we're talking 1999, I'm going to lean heavily into the J-horror. But I promise, there won't be any long-haired ghost girls on this list. Aw, damn. Okay, maybe one film uses that trope. Sort of. To be fair, she's not actually dead. 1999 was a year where Western studios were trying hard to reconceptualize the horror genre, and a number of big-budget projects were given a green light. There were two star-studded remakes of old haunted house classics, and a few original titles aimed at marketing films with horror elements to a wider audience. Most of these films had plots intended to make the most of big star power, expensive set pieces, and an abundance of special effects. Although I appreciate the financial risks Hollywood took making these films, they are a clear departure from the more thoughtful, atmospheric features that have become synonymous with modern horror. Today, these titles have a dedicated fan base, but considering their cost, it's hard to argue they did very much to push the genre forward. At the same time, across the Pacific, films like Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure and Hideo Nakata's Ringu had inspired a new generation of Japanese directors to push the genre's limits within the country. One example of this is Masayuki Hoshii's Saimin, which in the West is better known as The Hypnotist or Hypnosis. The Hypnotist is a film that borrows heavily from Kurosawa's Cure. But while Cure is a mind-bending meditation on people's fragile perception of reality, The Hypnotist offers a much more straightforward catch-the-killer plot that leans heavily into its twists and inventive death sequences. So yeah, you could say The Hypnotist swaps out brains for blood, but the film is very aware not to take itself too seriously. The film's story revolves around an investigation of a series of bizarre suicides, where each of the victims spoke the words "green monkey" before dying. Believing the connection to be more than just pure coincidence, the lead detective speaks with a young psychiatrist who suggests that hypnosis could have been used as a trigger in each death. This sets off a manhunt to locate the evasive green monkey murderer before he can find himself more victims. The Hypnotist does not shy away from the idea of hypnosis being used as a tool to commit sexual assault and rape. Mihu Kanu gives a spectacular performance as a hypnosis target of the Green Monkey, who simultaneously suffers from dissociative identity disorder. And I'm not sure M. Night Shyamalan didn't perhaps borrow an idea or two from this film to use in one of his later films. At its halfway point, I was honestly considering placing The Hypnotist near the top of this list. The first two acts are great, but the film's final act goes a little too far off the rails for my liking. From what I've read online, there are definitely people out there who like the final plot twists. But I'm of the camp that believes perhaps there's one twist too many, so I'm happy letting The Hypnotist fall into the 10th spot. Gemini is a horror fantasy directed by Shinya Sakamoto. Sakamoto is best known for his experimental cyberpunk nightmare, Tetsuo the Iron Man. Yeah, that film. Sakamoto's films regularly involve body horror, and his filmmaking style has often been described as kinetic. And Gemini certainly has its moments of both. But compared to the films in the Tetsuo franchise, Gemini is a decidedly quieter, more lyrical affair. Gemini tells the story of a former military doctor living in 1910 Tokyo. At the start of the film, the doctor lives with his wife, who has amnesia, and his two judgmental parents. The doctor's life starts to unravel when a mysterious doppelganger stalks his home, looking to steal his identity. Gemini sits back at number 9 because the story can be a little hard to follow at times. It's kind of an adult fairy tale with lots of twists, but if you stick with it, the story will make sense. Well, at least on a metaphorical level, and the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. Many of the shots contain contrasting blue and red monochromatic color schemes that accentuate the film's various themes. But what really makes Gemini stand out is the way Sakamoto challenges our expectations on who the real villain of this movie might be. There's no doubt that in 1999, Western studios were pretty willing to take some wild risks with horror concepts and then wait to see who comes. It was an approach that ended up being extremely hit or miss at the box office, and when Ravenous found its way into theaters, it was a flop. But over time, the film's garnered a considerable cult following. Ravenous tells the story of an American soldier who fought in the Mexican-American War. His reputation as a war hero gets called into question, and this results in him being transferred to a remote outpost in the Sierra Nevada. Soon after he arrives, a mysterious stranger shows up begging for help to save his remaining traveling companion from a colonel who went mad after the group resorted to cannibalism to survive the winter trapped in the mountains.
And when I returned, the others were cooking his legs for dinner.
Oh.
Ravenous is a bit of a genre bender. It's part western, part cannibal horror, part comedy, and part dark satire. Honestly, this really isn't a film that should work, but it actually ends up coming together surprisingly well, due to some truly inspired performances from Guy Pearce, Jeffrey Jones, and Robert Carlyle. And I won't lie, part of Ravenous's weird charm comes from how tonally awkward it can be at times. Antonia Bird is the only female director to make this top 10 list, but she's also the third director brought into the project. So I wouldn't exactly call this a Hollywood win for gender equity behind the camera. Still, she deserves a lot of credit for salvaging an already partially shot project and turning it into an extremely original, dark comedy that doubles as a metaphor for how manifest destiny inevitably devoured the American frontier. And the soundtrack is like nothing I've heard before. But for no other reason, Ravenous makes this list because of Robert Carlyle's portrayal of Cahoon, a character that is easily one of the best horror villains of 1999.
You know, Ben Franklin once said, "Eat to live. Don't live to eat." Huh? Huh?
I might have some explaining to do. The Red Room is an exploitive horror fetish porn directed by Daisuke Yamanouchi. Yeah, you heard me right. In 1999, Yamanouchi was part of a growing list of Japanese directors making dark, direct-to-video, extreme exploitation films after the success of the Guinea Pig series in the 1980s. In fact, 1999 was kind of a banner year for Yamanouchi, who directed 3 films that all continue to have a significant cult following. Now I'll admit, Red Room is way more gross out than gore, and relies heavily on body fluids and egregious sexual acts. Watching, I only gagged twice. So why is it on this list? For one thing, its premise is significantly ahead of its time, and still holds relevance. The film is about a reality show where 4 contestants are randomly asked to think of challenges which would make the other 3 forfeit their right to the 10 million yen prize. It's kind of an early take on a Saw-style torture film that is also critical of the entertainment value of humiliation. And even though it clocks in at only 68 minutes, the film packs in a variety of creative tortures, ranging from the silly to the inevitably sadistic, that are now, pretty much forever, etched in my memory. But, if I'm being honest, Red Room is also one of the only films on this list to make me feel genuinely emotional near its ending. Really. The film goes in some interesting directions after it's revealed one of the characters is transgender. Not that this depiction isn't without problems, including the character's stated age, but considering what the Red Room is, and when it was released, well, the way this was handled could have been way more offensive. In fact, Yamanouchi actually approaches the subject with a surprising degree of sensitivity. Look, I understand exactly what Red Room is, and I appreciate a filmmaker's attempts at making something memorable despite severe budget limitations. And over the years, I've built up a pretty high tolerance for what can be put on a screen. So, I know this is a film that's not for everyone, and if you're worried Red Room isn't a film for you, it probably isn't, and that's alright. But if you want to accuse me of putting the grossest film in '99 on this list just for the sake of shock value, well, believe me, I know of one title that came out of Russia that is far, far worse. With Repulsion, Rosemary's Baby, and The Tenant, Roman Polanski solidified his position as a master of the psychological thriller. But when making a film about a search for a book that could summon the devil, he actually turned to another style of film he had previous success dabbling in, the neo-noir.
Okay, go home. But in case you're interested, your husband was murdered.
The Ninth Gate is a mystery involving murder, the occult, demonic interventions, and engravings in 3 books that may have been illustrated by Lucifer himself. It may not necessarily fit some people's definition of a horror film, but it certainly is a film that contains a lot of horror elements. Johnny Depp plays Dean Corso, an unscrupulous book dealer with a knack for getting his hands on rare finds. He's hired by Boris Balkan, a wealthy collector of books on the occult, to locate 2 of 3 remaining copies of The 9 Gates of the Kingdom of Shadows, a rare book believed to be co-written by Satan. But shortly after Balkan entrusts his own copy of the book to Corso, the book dealer finds his partner murdered and his own life to be in danger. So to better understand the true intentions of his benefactor, Corso starts examining the pages of the book for himself. The Ninth Gate is very plot-heavy, and a lot of the scenes contain little details that are easy to miss. Many people have likened the film to a riddle because of some of the design ambiguities, but you don't have to be intimidated by the main story. It's actually not that difficult to follow. And the performances in this film, including that of many of the minor characters, are outstanding. At the time of its release, Johnny Depp surprisingly faced criticism for playing the character a bit too low-key, but I think his take on the film's amoral anti-hero is spot on. Like the film itself, his character and his goals are every bit an enigma. Look, I'm not one to obsess about a single movie, but The Ninth Gate certainly is a film that some people repeatedly view, hoping to validate deeper religious or occult interpretations. And though I'm happy with my original thoughts on the movie, I still recommend reading some of the better developed theories out there after you give this one a watch. There are a lot of people who have some pretty convincing arguments that can make you see this film in new and interesting ways. In 1998, the original Whispering Corridors film was more than just a supernatural horror set in an all-girls school. It also stirred up a lot of controversy in South Korea for its critical depiction of the use of corporal punishment inside the classroom. But despite the Korean Educational Board's failed efforts to have the film banned, it would go on to be the third highest grossing title in South Korea that year, and helped to revive the horror genre within the country. So came the rush for a follow-up film, set in a different all-girls school, telling a different supernatural tale of a vengeful ghost. But it turns out that Kim Tar-young and Min Hya-dong, the two directors they hired to write and film it, were way more inspired by the social critique aspects of the original Whispering Corridors than they were in the ghost story. In fact, part of what makes Memento Mori unique is how hard the directors work to not have a long-haired ghost girl in their film. At least not in any way that obviously caters to the convention. Of course, this has kind of made Memento Mori a bit of an outlier amongst fans of the franchise, which currently has 6 films to its name. But depending on who you ask, Memento Mori is either the worst film in the franchise, or it's the only one that's even better than the original. Then again, Memento Mori's directors haven't exactly embraced the Whispering Corridors name either. Some of the re-releases have even tried to do away with the franchise's name entirely. Memento Mori's main story is focused around the shared diary of 2 gay students that gets discovered by another classmate. The girl who reads the diary learns that their relationship had a tragic ending, and then, in real time, witnesses things between them get even worse. However, the film's fly-on-the-wall approach also allows it to cover a whole range of issues that deal with body shaming, homophobia, teen pregnancy, teen suicide, physically and sexually abusive teachers, and I'm pretty sure one girl is just plain psychotic. It's actually pretty amazing that the film can pack in so much without any of it feeling forced. In fact, you have to wait until the second half of Memento Mori for a ghost to even show up. That's when the film slowly transforms itself to an odd, surreal nightmare with strong psychological undertones. The change in tone is absolutely jarring, yet it totally works. And frankly, Memento Mori has one of the best examples of possession being used as a metaphor since, well, Andrei Zavovsky's Possession. Memento Mori is not always an easy film to follow because of its use of a disjointed timeline. You may need to take the time to rewatch a few parts, but the story will come together. That is, at least until some of its logic implodes in those final few minutes. And even that ends up being fitting in a film that essentially puts you inside the head of a confused adolescent girl.
He's down. That's the same one.
The Blair Witch Project was not the first found footage horror ever made, but was the first good one to be shown internationally that employed the technique throughout the entire duration of its runtime. Until it came along, previous attempts at found footage horror were mostly niche films shown in festivals, and some of the better-known early titles, like Cannibal Holocaust and Celluloid Nightmares, only really contain found footage segments that last about a third of their total runtime.
It's not the same look.
The Blair Witch Project is also famous for essentially ghost watching a lot of its viewers at its Sundance premiere into believing its main characters were real-life victims of a supernatural being that lurked somewhere within the state of Maryland. And truth be told, it even managed to trick a few people afterwards, too.
Holy shit. Come up here quick! I need to use the CP!
Directors Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez deserve a lot of credit for bringing the found footage genre into the mainstream, and doing so for under $60,000. There's no doubt that this film helped to inspire a whole generation of young filmmakers to view horror as an achievable genre to launch their careers. The Blair Witch Project is a pseudo-documentary that is claimed to be spliced together using footage that was found in the forest where 3 documentary crew members went missing. And you gotta have some respect for that simple, yet effectively foreboding title card.
You look a little blurry there.
Heather Donahue, the brains behind this documentary project, assembles a crew to help her make a film about a witch whose legend dates back to 1785, a time when the present town of Burkittsville was called Blair.
We're doing a documentary about the Blair Witch. Oh, have you heard of the Blair Witch?
Oh yeah, that's an old story.
You've heard of the
At
Blair
first
Witch?
they talk to locals, but the stories they get of weird happenings throughout the years are conflicting.
Right.
Wool shawl over her.
And she scared you? She threatened you?
She didn't say anything.
Then they enter the
Very,
forest
very close
themselves
now.
to see the areas where a lot of strange things occurred.
You guys excited?
The original plan was to stay for 3 nights.
Dude, guys.
I wonder what went wrong.
Do you remember something that Mary Brown said the other day?
The unseen presence of a witch certainly brings a supernatural element into the film. But scares in the Blair Witch Project actually work more on a psychological level, requiring audiences to use their imagination to fill in some of the blanks about what is happening off screen. But it's the film's final frames that deliver a gut punch that is one of the creepiest in any horror. But what really makes the Blair Witch Project special is how authentic the whole experience feels. The 3 actors involved deserve recognition for delivering performances that were convincing enough to fool a good number of people into believing a Blair Witch might really be out there. And actress Heather Donahue, who probably shouldn't have used her real name in the movie, delivers one of the most iconic monologues in all of cinema.
Because it was my project. And I insisted. I insisted on everything.
And even though an impressive, but equally misleading marketing campaign helped to catapult the Blair Witch to popularity, the truth is that many people still flock to see the film, even after its based on a true story claims were long discredited. And look, if I was ranking films solely in terms of influence on the horror genre, the Blair Witch Project would be ranked number 1. But I was around when this film was released, and like many who saw it in theaters, I couldn't help but feel like Myrick and Sanchez left some meat on the bone with this one. Despite its legacy, the Blair Witch Project remains a pretty divisive film that has lost a little of its shine over the years to later found footage entries that were more willing to place the horror in front of the camera. So I feel pretty good about slotting this one in at number 4. Muzan-E, which is better known as Celluloid Nightmares in the West, is an extreme exploitation film directed by Daisuke Yamanouchi. You know, the guy who brought us Red Room. Yamanouchi was in peak form in 1999, and Celluloid Nightmares is easily the best film of the lot. If, like me, you're the kind of person who wondered what the Poughkeepsie tapes might have been like had the nastiness been taken up a notch, then yeah, you're probably going to like this one. But this pick comes with a warning. Like Red Room, Celluloid Nightmares is a mature, adult horror with graphic sexual content. The film has an 18+ rating, so you'll have to decide for yourself whether it's a film for you. Celluloid Nightmares is a pseudo-documentary about a small crew making a true crime video on the disappearance of Mai Suame, a popular Japanese porn star. Suame became popular in fetish porn circles, specifically for her work in menstruation porn, which Yamanouchi shows us to be every bit as gross as it sounds. But if you can manage to stomach it, you may recognize a tinge of extremely self-aware dark humor and satire embedded within these scenes. The documentary crew talk with those who had last worked with the missing actress and explore a rumor about a snuff tape that supposedly exists, showing she was actually brutally murdered. Turns out, the tape is real, and of course the documentary crew will eventually get their hands on a copy. And when faced with the ethical dilemma of whether they should make the footage from that tape public, well, of course they're going to show it. It's worth noting that Celluloid Nightmares was also incorporating found footage into its story around the same time the Blair Witch Project came out. And today, it's pretty common to label all pseudo-documentaries as a spin-off of found footage. So, I guess it could be argued that Celluloid Nightmares is actually a found footage film right from the start. But unlike the Blair Witch Project, Yamanouchi is very willing to put all kinds of horrible and disgusting things in front of the camera, making us partially implicit in all the awfulness we see. The connection between porn and snuff is intentional, and the film contains a powerful message about our complacency with the content we consume. And some of the film's more meta aspects, especially towards the ending, remind me of another Japanese title that would again catch viewers off guard 18 years later. Celluloid Nightmares is definitely a depraved film, but it's also a film that's smarter than it has any right to be. Yamanouchi is very aware that the best extreme films have elements of dark humor ingrained within their most contentious sequences. And this is largely why Celluloid Nightmares is considered by many to be an extreme horror masterpiece.
You know the accident up there?
Yeah.
Someone got hurt.
They did?
A lady. She died.
Oh my god, but you can see her?
Yes.
Where is she?
Standing next to my window.
In 1999, The Sixth Sense was not the only film that had a child that could talk to dead people.
I did. I told him.
To tell the truth, I had a hard time leaving Stir of Echoes off this list, but the plot surrounding its mystery can feel a bit sluggish, as viewers wait for the film's characters to catch up with what most people have already figured out.
Boy's got the eyes on him, doesn't he?
And this problem's made worse by exposition drops that don't really add anything to the overall story. So I have my reasons for not including it. Still, I feel like David Koepp's Stir of Echoes deserves to be given a special mention, because there are moments that are genuinely frightening, and it is willing to go into some pretty dark places, including its depiction of a rape, though, to be honest, it seems to be a reoccurring thing in 1999.
You're drifting closer and closer.
Plus, those hypnosis theater scenes are really well done. I actually saw Stir of Echoes in theaters when it was released, and I won't get in the way of anybody who wants to label it a hidden gem.
They start to come into focus. The letters spell sleep. Sleep.
But the main problem with Stir of Echoes, which unfortunately was even more obvious at the time of its release, is that so many aspects of the film are just done better by that other film about seeing dead people. And that one found its way into theaters first, if only by a few months. The Sixth Sense hits every bit as hard with scares, while managing to be much more atmospheric. It also has the kind of performances that earn Oscar nominations.
I see dead people.
And of course there's that one line nobody forgets.
In your dreams?
And that ending.
While you're awake?
Oh, poor Stir of Echoes never stood a chance.
$800.
But yeah, Stir of Echoes is a pretty good watch too. The Sixth Sense is a film about a troubled boy whose case is taken on by an equally troubled psychiatrist. The psychiatrist, Malcolm Crowe, is returning to work after a horrible incident with a former patient who committed suicide in front of him. Crowe sees that a lot of his former patient's symptoms are exhibited by the boy, and he starts to view the case as a way of redeeming his past failure. But what ails the boy evades him. That is, until he builds up enough trust to learn the boy's horrible secret. The boy says he can communicate with dead people. But he's still just a child, and those nasty ghosts he sees just won't go away. Worse still, some of them seem to have some really bad intentions.
Hey, come on. I'll show you where my dad keeps his gun. Come on.
The Sixth Sense is the film that made the phrase "pull the Shyamalan" a thing. Before director M. Night Shyamalan decided to make twist endings his gimmick,
I thought you meant the other Italian restaurant I asked you to marry me in.
he delivered his best one. Personally, I wish Shyamalan would have tried more to replicate some of the other aspects of The Sixth Sense instead, like the throwback vibe to those great supernatural psychological thrillers of the past. The late 90s was a time when horror was still trying to find its way after over a decade of slashers caused fatigue to set in. By taking inspiration from the best supernatural horrors of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, Shyamalan showed the studios that one path forward could come by taking a closer examination of what really made those classics truly great. And you could tell watching the film that all the actors involved believed in this project. Bruce Willis even risked taking a huge pay cut to play his role, tying the size of his paycheck to the film's box office revenue. Turned out to be a solid investment. And yeah, Willis is fine, But really, it's a young Haley Joel Osment that steals the show.
You believe me, right?
Look, I know The Sixth Sense is always going to be remembered for its ending. But for me, what makes this film so memorable is watching Osment's pitch-perfect performance as the tortured Cole Sear. The young protagonist starts the film behaving believably schizophrenic, only to then have Shyamalan cleverly show us very rational reasons for all his actions. The Sixth Sense is just a reminder that when done right, horror can be a fantastic vehicle to explore the stigma around mental illness. Young Cole's life is a psychological hellscape, but watching him try to adapt in a world that can't see or truly understand his fears is what makes The Sixth Sense an experience to remember. I can't think of any film from the 90s that served as a better harbinger for the more mature, often graphic content that would come at the turn of the millennium than Takashi Miike's Audition, with maybe the possible exception of Michael Haneke's Funny Games. Only Haneke's film was actually intended as an admonishment of graphic violence in film, so he keeps his most brutal moments off the screen.
Keine Panik, es passiert nichts.
Miike, in contrast, is usually willing to show us as much as his budget allows. Audition is a film that seemed to predict the coming focus on human horrors that will be at the center of the new French extremity movement in the coming decade. This is a movie that helped bring extreme film elements to a wider audience, conditioning us for the more provocative, controversial films by directors like Sion Sono, Lars von Trier, and Gaspar Noé. In full disclosure, if I was making a list of the top horror films of all time, Audition would probably be on it. There's a reason that Audition always enters into the conversations about the best J-horrors, even though it sticks out like a sore thumb, because it doesn't deal with the supernatural and never inspired an American remake. But it's also a film whose reputation of being disgusting is admittedly overhyped, unless you have a fear of needles. Like The Sixth Sense, Audition's brilliant but devastating ending might be a bit of a disservice to how truly great the rest of the film is.
あなたはもう動けない。体は死ぬけど、神経だけは起こしておいてあげます。
The story is about Aoyama, a widower who, after 7 years of raising his son as a single father, confesses to a friend in the film industry they would like to remarry.
なんだ。やっぱり無理かな。
The friend, Yashikawa, suggests letting him help by holding an audition for a bogus project as a chance for Aoyama to meet some women.
Audition.
Pretending to be a casting director, Aoyama chooses 30 women to audition. But before the audition even begins, he already has his mind set on a 24-year-old woman named Asami, who included in her resume a harrowing letter about how she was forced to give up on her dream of becoming a ballerina after a career-ending injury. Although the setup of Audition screams of masculine entitlement and abuses in power, the film actually starts off like it's going to gloss over these issues by taking a lighter tone similar to that of a lot of romantic comedies. At least one girl auditioning even gets naked for the two men. Yet the way the whole audition sequence plays out suggests the two are going to get away with the ruse without consequences. That is, of course, before Asami arrives. Turns out, there's something about Asami that bothers Yoshikawa. But an infatuated Aoyama insists that she's the one. And when he gives her a call, she says she'd be happy to meet with him. Oh, Aoyama, you have no idea what you just set in motion. Audition is a masterclass at slowly building tension with its patient storytelling and wonderfully creepy imagery. The film is clearly a rebuke of patriarchal privilege in Japanese society. It does so in a way that is complex instead of smug and sanctimonious. For all of Aoyama's sins, he still comes across as a genuinely decent guy who doesn't deserve what's coming. And Ashikawa, whose attitude is arguably even more misogynistic, ends up being the one who's ultimately right. But there's also a sense of poetic justice in Asami's actions, as her troubled past gives her a semi-justified motivation to her crimes. And I say semi-justified because, well, she is still a psychopath. But her victims are not chosen at random. And this added layer to her character has helped make Asami one of the most iconic horror villains of 1999. In fact, I've seen people cosplay as her at festivals. But to truly understand Audition, you have to try to make some sense of Aoyama's hallucinations and dreams. The film, at its core, is really just a psychological dissection of a man who hides feelings of guilt and shame that are extremely relatable, even decades after it premiered. And this makes Audition my pick at number 1. So there you have it. 1999's got adult horror fantasy, some found footage, a throwback to the supernatural thriller, some ambiguous or shock endings, and plenty of torture. All trends that would take us into the coming decade. What 1999 doesn't have is a lot of scares. I mean, it's not a great sign when what is often considered the year's scariest film actually contains no scares at all. But perhaps I'm wrong. I know I didn't pick the scariest films for this list, but that's because I didn't find 99 to have films that were really all that scary. This is a year that's better defined as bizarre and fun. And you can't really accuse the directors of this year of playing it safe. Yeah, the list from other years will definitely have more frights. Promise. Still, I encourage people in the comments to come up with some competing lists. Maybe even ones for the scariest films of 1999. Perhaps I'm missing something. Let me know what you think. Until next time, just remember that there are great modern horrors everywhere. You just gotta know where to look.